The key phrasing here is to overcome and not to get rid of, but I'll elaborate more on that later in the video. When a surge of insecure thoughts sprout into my head, I deal with them with one of two ways. The first is a set of phrases I say to myself, while the second is one phrase I say to myself. However, both of these methods only really work once I first realize that I'm having anxious, negative thoughts about myself. That's step 0, realizing that what I'm thinking are insecure thoughts about myself. In a way, you could even say that this step 2 is a way to disrupt a negative flow of thinking, because you can easily go, oh, that's a negative thought, or that's an insecure thought. Let's stop thinking like that. Let's think about something else. But in my experience, that's just simply suppressing or ignoring the problem as opposed to dealing and addressing it. Anxiety is basically conspiracy theories about yourself. I like that quote because it feels accurate, and though they were referring to social anxiety in this context, it really applies to all forms and sizes of this spicy sensation. This is how I can tell that I'm being self-conscious. When I'm conspiring against myself. When I'm saying things or creating stories in my head of the people around me that magnify the flaws and insecurities that I have. Which leads to the first step to my first method. Once I realize that I've fallen into an anxious thought pattern, I simply tell myself to prove it. To prove whatever conspiracy I've built with irrefutable evidence. Otherwise, I can assume that that theory is false. Remember, we're pattern finders. We seek connections in everything in order to understand and rationalize it. And the connotations and comprehension of those connections are influenced by our emotional biases. In other words, because I'm an anxious person, I will see patterns and make connections that will affirm and give me reason to be anxious, which is really a self-defense mechanism that keeps me safe. Being aware that I can't trust the conspiracies I make to be accurate. And so I ask myself for proof, and I always come up short. Which leads to the second step. I flip the script onto other people. This step is the reassurance step I take when the conspiracies I built revolve around other people's perception of me, just in case I am somehow mistaken, and people's thoughts of me are as I fear. Then I reassure myself by saying, their thoughts are their thoughts, and therefore their problem. Other people's idea of me is their business, not mine. I don't know if you've realized this, but we don't feel other people's perception of us. We feel what we think their perception is, based on what we think they've focused on, which of course is going to be our flaws because that's what we would focus on. So after I'm done questioning the integrity of my anxious thinking, I finish my process by repeating the notion that the reality of the thoughts that I fear is not something for me to care about. It's not something for me to care about because what other people think is what other people think, not me. Hence, it's their endeavor to deal with. Now, the second way I overcome my anxious thinking is a little bit synonymous to that last step, but not exactly. Whenever I fuck up. Whenever I erroneously do something that triggers my PTSD of making mistakes, I remind myself that the identity of who I am, and therefore my own personal value, is not contingent to that something. And this doesn't just apply to when I make mistakes. When I get heckled, when I get yelled at, when I have some contractor talking shit. Essentially, whenever an external variable tests and challenges the integrity of my character, I use these words to remind me that those tests and challenges don't measure my worth, unless I let them. And currently, I'm not in the mood to let things and situations define me, if I can help it. These scripts are how I overcome my anxious thinking. Overcoming is not the same as abolishing. I don't try to abolish my thoughts, because I can't. Because there's no such thing. There's a reason why I have my thoughts. They have biological purpose. So if I try to get rid of them, I'll only be suppressing them. And I'll only be doing so temporarily, until my subconscious sends them back out with a vengeance. Henceforth, it's much better to overcome them by addressing them, by understanding why it is that they're there. And in time and with emotional experience, your thoughts will change. They will. It's science. Psychology. And unfortunately for you and me, psychology isn't something you can flip on and off. Our psychology is something we can only cooperate with. And so if you want to know how that's done, stick around. It doesn't hurt. And more importantly, it's free.